Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Tucker Edmonds, and I am the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture. Welcome to the first session of the Center's Religion and series. 2020 has been a year. Continued civil unrest, an unrelenting pandemic, and previously unimagined shifts in the way that we deliver and engage teaching, researching, and collaboration across space and time. In these times, we need safe harbors to engage and unpack questions about the relationship between cultural transformation in North America and the category of religion. For the last 32 years, or more than 30 years, the Center, its journal, the Young Scholar Program has been just that. It has brought together scholars and practitioners to engage religion and its relationship to the most important questions in our fields, on our campuses, and throughout our society. This Religion And is a series of monthly conversations between leading academics and thinkers across multiple fields hosted by the Center to continue these critically important interventions. Every third Thursday, so please join us at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We will discuss a topic that looks at the relationship between religion, the pressing issues of our day, and their impact on the fields we study. Today, our inaugural session is Religion and Gender and Race in the 2020 Political Landscape. We are 100 years after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, and at this moment of racial reckoning, the American political climate is still dominated by the unequal representation of women, especially women of color, in local, state, and electoral politics. For this inaugural session of Religion And, we will explore the intersection of gender, race, politics, and the role of religion. Please, everyone out there, remember that throughout today's session, we are asking folks to submit questions through the Q&A feature on Zoom. So everybody look down below. You all see the Q&A feature. That's how you will enable the host and the panelists to engage the questions that you submit throughout this important conversation. But with no further ado or any other preamble, let me introduce our host, and they will introduce the rest of our esteemed panel for today's discussion. Our hosts for this afternoon are Dr. Anthea Butler, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, the author of Women in the Church of God in Christ, Making a Sanctified World, and the forthcoming White Evangelical Racism, the Politics of Morality in America, and Philip Goff, who is a Chancellor's Professor of American Studies and the Director of the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture at IUPUI. Please, everyone, get ready for an exciting and engaging conversation, and I will now hand it over to our host.
Thank you, Joseph. First of all, I gotta say thank you to Anthea for joining me here. Anthea and I go way back. I was trying to think, it was Pasadena days that could be close to 25 years.
Yeah, scary, 1993 probably, 94?
Yeah,
long time.
I got there in 93. Well, unlike me, you've not changed a bit. So
thank you.
It's good to see you and be with you this afternoon. Let me introduce our two other panelists. The first is Melissa Borja, who is Assistant Professor in the Department of American Culture at University of Michigan. She's also a core faculty member in the Asian Pacific Islander American Studies program there. Melissa has a book that's at Harvard right now, I believe, entitled Follow the New Way Among Refugee Resettlement and Practice of American Religious Pluralism. She lives here in Indy. She's a professor in Michigan, but she lives in Indianapolis, and I'm very pleased that as of October 1st, she's also a community research scholar in the center, and so we're very happy to have her with us. She got to know Indianapolis through the Young Scholars Program in 2018 and 19, so it's nice of you to stay in town after the program ended. Next is Grace Yukich, who was also, by the way, in Young Scholars back in, I think, 2014 through 16. Yeah, I know. Well, you're talking to the mid-90s here. She's a professor of sociology at Quinnipiac University and is the author of One Family Under God, Immigration, Politics, and Progressive Religion in America. That one was from Oxford. But she's also co-editor recently of Religion is Race, Understanding American Religion in the 21st Century. You've seen her articles in a number of places, including Social Problems, Sociology of Religion, JSSR. Now, I want to reiterate something Joseph introduced us with. and that the goal of most of the center's activities is really to promote a culture of conversation. Whether you're looking at the journal and the forums we run there, or if you're looking at the Young Scholars in American Religion program, you're looking at the biennial, or other events that we run, we really want to have more conversation and make that as interdisciplinary and as diverse a group of voices around the table as possible, because only then do each of us take it back to our own disciplines and we grow this field in I think, more exciting and really more precise ways as to how to understand religion in North America. So that's what we're hoping to do here. Again, if you've been to our biennials, you know that we have a center table and there are 4 people around it who initially answer, and then you've got 120 people around who join in. We can't have all 120 people around the table with us in the same way, but that's where I hope the Q&A will come in. I'm going to be keeping an eye on things. I've got a series of questions and things like that. There's a lot that we can talk about, but I think it's important for us to recognize that we're honoring the fact that this is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, and we're also honoring the fact that this is a moment of racial reckoning in the United States. So while we will talk at times about gender and religion, and at times we might talk about race and religion, I'm really hoping this conversation is where we can get to the intersection of religion and race and gender in this political moment. So I thought I would throw out a question, and maybe I'll throw it to Anthea first and let her refine it then with her answer, and we'll pose it to the other 2. But each of you comes at this topic from different angles, different disciplinary backgrounds, even different subjects that you write about. What is your sense from your corner of the university and the field of the best way to understand religion's role at this intersection of race and gender in today's political landscape? Maybe I'll start with you, Anthea, and then we'll take it out.
Yeah, I think the way to understand it is it's a mess right now. But on the other hand, it is the culmination of a lot of things that I think many of us have not paid attention to. And I'm not going to include myself in that because I think I've been paying attention to it. But let me put it like this. We've had a tendency to think in the presidential campaigns about the role of evangelicals, the role of the Black church, the role of, voters and older voters and all this. And we haven't really decided to start to look at how gender, race, and religion intersect in elections. And I think that's a really important point, because this election cycle, we can see different things. In my corner of the world where I am in the corner of Pennsylvania. And I am in a corner of Pennsylvania that is very important right now because we're the liberal part of Pennsylvania. People have made jokes about the middle of Pennsylvania, but I won't do those today. But I want to just use that as a lens in which to look at the intersections of gender, race, and religion. So if we're talking about Philadelphia, we're talking about 2 interesting populations, mostly African-American population and immigrant population, lots of women, lots of first-time voters. And what we're also talking about, Catholic women who are mostly white and, conservative kind of voters. And so it's been an interesting thing to watch what has happened here in the city vis-a-vis Bucks County, which is right outside of Philadelphia County, vis-a-vis the middle of the state, vis-a-vis Western PA, and how those women are going to be voting. And so you might have seen the news the other day where President Trump said to suburban women voters, he said, "I'm protecting you. Won't you like me? Why don't you like me?" Right? And I thought, this is not the time to do your Sally Field impersonation. You're trying to get votes, but at the same time, there was a point there. And the point is that he realizes that he's losing these women voters and all these people in this intersection because of the way he has behaved. And so I think this is very interesting to look at in the role of Pennsylvania as a battleground state, because what we're dealing with here is, a hometown boy, Biden, and his running mate, Kamala Harris, a woman of color, who has made all of these kinds of opened up new doorways and for ways for people to think about and, presents a really great hope vis-a-vis a very patriarchal kind of campaign where right now we're seeing Amy Coney Barrett as the representative of this should make women want to join us. And if that is the case, then I'm wondering what else they have to offer. So I'll leave it like that. as an opener and pitch to both Grace and Melissa and ask how you see this in the election cycle. And whichever one of you wants to go first is fine.
I'll jump in because I'm also partially located in a swing state, so I'm feeling the same energy right now, split between Michigan and Indiana, which is not a swing state, but there are swing portions of Indiana. So I would completely agree with this assessment of the situation. It is a mess. And I think one thing that I find really interesting is to see how common it is to have simple stories about what religion is doing in this election. If you look at a lot of newspaper articles, you would think that the only story worth paying attention to right now is how conservative Christians, whether evangelical or Catholic, care about abortion enough to show up on November 3rd or beforehand. But I study Asian Americans, and I know that you can't make any easy claim about Asian Americans because Asian Americans are so internally diverse. So I think they're a really good example of how we need to resist the temptation to tell a simple story. Within Asian Americans, there's so much ethnic diversity, class diversity, generational diversity, and religious diversity. So we know, for example, that Asian Americans overwhelmingly support the Democrats, both in congressional races and also for the presidential race. But you take a closer look and you can see, for example, that Indian Americans, very supportive of Democrats, but Vietnamese Americans, not so much. And then even if you look at Vietnamese Americans, there are younger Vietnamese Americans who are more supportive and older Vietnamese Americans who are less supportive of Democrats. And that often falls on class lines and religious lines, Buddhist Vietnamese Americans versus Catholic Vietnamese Americans. So I just say all of this to remind us to always push to look a little bit deeper, look more into the details, because when we do, things get really interesting, so much more interesting than the story about conservative white evangelicals and Catholics caring about abortion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would echo so much of what you just said, Melissa. In my own work on these topics, you know, I know, for example, Janelle Wong's research on evangelicals who are not white, right, and the ways in which they vote shows a much more diverse and mixed picture. You know, Chinese Americans, for example, tend to be much more conservative than many Asian Americans, right, and tend to vote Republican a bit more often. And there's generational differences too, right? So, you know, the second generation for many Asian Americans tends to vote a bit more Democratic because they've been a part of the American system longer and they've seen the ways in which being a person of color in the United States can come with these really, you know, difficult situations. And so that, you know, really makes people see things a bit differently. So I think looking at these intersections, the intersection between religion and race, the intersection between religion, race, and gender is so essential. You know, Phil mentioned the book that, you know, I just published with my co-editor, Penny Edgell, on religion being raced. And there's a chapter in that book by Sikavu Hutchinson, who is an independent scholar. She's herself a Black woman who is a humanist and has written several books about women of color who are secular humanists. And one of the things that she writes about is that, you know, people who are, you know, women of color are, you know, that she has studied are really, really active in politics, but they're active in politics in ways that really differ from white secular humanists, right? Who, many of whom are men, right? So she really talks in these really complicated ways about how the issues that, you know, Black women who are atheists and humanists care about are issues like food justice and racial justice and things that directly impact their communities more than, you know, saying like, well, we don't want to engage with religious people because we're atheists. So those kind of boundary drawing exercises that seem to be really important for a lot of white men who are atheists are maybe not as important for Black women and their politics and what that means to them.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you both. I think, Phil, did you want to follow up with another question? Because I was going to open it up a little bit here.
Go ahead. I've got something to come back to that Grace got into there. But
oh
please
no, well, go ahead and do that first, and then I'll
no, that was something that actually Melissa and I were talking the other day about what does political activity look like, and how might it look different in some of these other communities? And you touched on that some, Grace, but I wonder if Melissa or Anthea have anything to weigh in on there, or maybe Grace has more she wants to say.
I don't know, Grace, you want to go first? I'll say this. Let me put it like this. I had a chance to meet Sikivu this summer because I did a Black atheist session with them, which was really great, and I enjoyed talking to them. But I'm thinking about this, and I'm actually thinking about younger women of color and what has happened in terms of activism with Black Lives Matter, especially this summer with everything that's happened. And I think that has pushed voting in a different kind of direction, in a different kind of way. The interesting arguments that I've been seeing online now, and this is a really heavy one between certain big rap stars, let's just say, is about what are both parties doing for the African-American community. And I think that, the gender issue is one that puts this in a different kind of realm, in part because where it's been a mostly male kind of oriented conversation, and I'm thinking back because I'm teaching a religion from civil rights to Black Lives Matter, I'm thinking about Malcolm X's The Ballad of the Bullet a lot, right? And where he says that both parties are not doing anything for us. And so we have to figure out a way to make things happen. And I think what's happening now is that these intersection of gender and religion and race are pushing political action in a different kind of way. It's not just about giving money, it's about who we're going to see as poll watchers this year. Lots of younger people doing that because of the coronavirus and all that. What we see in terms of local action. We had a lot of protests here this summer for Black Lives Matter, and a lot of younger activists were out at City Hall because basically our police force, beat people up on the main freeway and basically kettled them all together into a fence and just kept streaming tear gas on them. So what I'm seeing on a local level, at least, is this different ways of activity that's not just about you're not doing anything, but they're advocating for the homeless. They're doing all these different kinds of things that are political action, but they're not just about simply voting. And that's why I think it's really important for us to watch.
Just discussing this very issue yesterday when I had a chance to talk about the importance of voting with the Immigrant Welcome Center here in Indianapolis. And this question was raised: what can you do to participate in politics if you are not already a citizen? And I think this is a question that is raised over and over again in different immigrant communities. Well, I always like to hold up the example of Hmong Americans because I think they're really interesting, fascinating, and set a good example for other groups to follow. Not only do I study Hmong Americans in my current research, but I think they really offer a model for political engagement that more of us can really hold up. So Hmong Americans are very interesting because compared to other Asian American groups, they vote more than anyone else. They vote higher in average participation. I think in 2012, they were tied with Japanese Americans for voter participation. 89% voted for president, compared to 79% for other Asian Americans. So they're interesting for that reason. But I bring them up because they don't just show up at the polls. Some of them aren't citizens, for example. So what they have cultivated over the past 40 years is a whole culture of civic engagement and political participation, where family members talk to older generation and the younger generation and value public service and engagement in government in a way that's very different from other Asian immigrants. There is a value placed in voting and participating in the community and in public life that we don't see with other immigrant and refugee groups. And so you see different people in different, with different political statuses, maybe some able to vote, maybe some not, all talking about issues, working in organizations that serve the community. Maybe they're not able to vote themselves, but they're talking with other members of their community who can. Maybe they're supporting institutions that mobilize voters, like community organizations or labor unions. So I think that what they really illuminate is that in order to make sure that a community shows up at the polls, you don't need to just focus on the 100 days or the 30 days before an election day. You need to have a whole multi-pronged effort to cultivate positive commitment to political participation, which is what we see among Americans do.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Grace?
I would just say that, yes, I think all of these issues raised are important ones. And, you know, Anthea, you were talking about how people are getting involved in ways that involve getting involved in their communities, maybe things that aren't directly political always, but may have important political implications. And I live right outside of New Haven, which is a very diverse area, but is also a highly segregated area. It's predominantly, you know, there's a large white community, a large Black community, and a large immigrant community. And all of those communities live in different areas of town, basically. And even though this area is very heavily Democratic, the kind of local arm of the Democratic Party, which is the Democratic Town Committees, have tended to be also somewhat segregated and pretty dominated for a long time, at least in my town, by white folks, and to a large extent, white men. And so one of the things that I've seen happening since 2016 especially has been a push among young progressives in the local party, including a lot of young progressives of color, to say, look, you know, this leadership has to change. It just has to change. And it has to some degree. And so that's one way that is more explicitly political, that I've seen people getting involved at a local level to influence politics. But another way is I've seen some people kind of take a step back from that and say, you know what, that is not where I want to put my energy right now. It's not into canvassing or, you know, getting out the vote or whatever it may be, or, you know, working at the polls. Instead, what I really want to do is do community building. So, you know, I have a good friend who has decided that the place she wants to put her energy is to keep being the thorn in the side of the predominantly white community that she lives in, and reminding people every week, like, Black Lives Matter, and holding fundraisers and doing things to just keep people on their toes about it. Even people that, you know, consider themselves good white liberals, they, you know, they need those reminders. So I mean, I think there's been a lot of different ways that people have gotten involved, and some of those have been more explicitly religious. So there have been people that have gotten involved through their congregations in local politics in various ways. And some of it has been, you know, what I would call, you know, maybe spiritual but not religious, or even just non-religious people that are coming at it from more secular values.
Okay, great.
Anthea, you had a question you wanted to pose?
Yeah, Leah, let me put this out to everybody. And I want to start it off by sort of tempering it, because I want us to be, you know, I'm a historian, everybody's a little bit different here. So I'm going to put it as a history question. What do you see in terms of gender, race, and religion that has come from the past that is haunting us in the present? And it's Halloween, right? And so what are the issues from the past that are still, you know, in this 2020 election cycle that you see that intersect all three of these things? And what do we think is going to happen, you know, November 3rd with that, if they come up at all? And I'll leave my comment for the end on this. I'd like to hear from both Melissa and Grace first.
This is a big question.
Well, I mean, there's an obvious one. Can I just throw one out here real quick? I mean, here's a big issue from the past that is going to haunt us. And I think the issue of reproductive rights, because that is with what is basically going on right now with Amy Coney Barrett, is huge. And, you know, this sense in which, you know, the many people especially in the Democratic Party have been talking about, we're going to have to, you know, put more people on the court. We're going to have to do all this. This is an issue that I think has been looked at as a gender, race, and religion question, at least from the perspective of white women all throughout this time. It's been less so for Black women, but there have been Black women who have been very active in reproductive rights, and also from a religious perspective, right, on both sides of the spectrum, whether we think about it as pro-choice or pro-life. And, you know, this is where I get to reveal some of my own personal tension here because I'm part of the group Catholics for Biden, and I'm a representative for them. And so one of the arguments that we've been having right now, and about how we're going to talk, how do we talk to people on both sides, you know, in this very big issue and get people to vote for Joe Biden, even though he's saying, I am pro-choice, but, you know, I understand that there are a lot of people out here who are pro-life who can vote for me. And I'm just kind of wondering from your own perspectives, what you might see as something going forward. For me, that's the biggest issue right now, you know, in terms of gender, race, and religion. That is a big piece of this because we've seen the erosion of reproductive rights. And that has been something I think on lots of levels, we haven't really, you know, written about as much as we could have. I've seen great history books about this, but I've not seen the contemporary fight that has been happening since, you know, Wendy Davis stood up in the legislature in Texas and in her tennis shoes and did all this. There's been this ongoing battle, but I haven't seen this translate into kind of the kinds of religion conversations that I would like to see personally. It's always this, you know, big dichotomy like this. And so that's what I'm throwing out there, is to see about what do you think are these things that have come from the past that might be affecting us now in this election cycle?
So for me, I'm an immigration historian before I'm a religious historian, and I can't stop thinking about how some of the mid-century immigration policies that really changed the demographics of the United States and the immigration politics of the United States continue to be present with us today and really set us up to have really complicated discussions and polarizations on this issue. So let me see. About 50 years ago was when the Hart-Celler Act went into force. And so for those of you who don't know, the Hart-Celler Act did away with the very discriminatory national origins quotas that made it very difficult to come to the United States if you're coming from Eastern or Southern Europe or Asia. And so the advent of that piece of legislation was really very important in that more immigrants were coming from Asia. And so you have lots of demographic change. We also saw for the first time the imposition of numerical limits on immigrants coming from the Western Hemisphere. So you produce the problem of unauthorized immigration. And so that is very impactful. It sits with us today. It created in many ways the problem of unauthorized immigration that has been a matter of great debate for the past few decades. And we see the impact of this intersecting with religion in very interesting ways. So to return to Janelle Wong's research, which Grace mentioned earlier, one thing that is very interesting about how immigration intersects with religion in America is the fact that we have a lot of evangelicals who are not white, who are Latino, who are Asian American, and where you see big divisions is how they vote. And they vote differently from white evangelicals because, Janelle Wong argues, of how they see immigration differently. And so the issue of immigration is in part what accounts for the cleavage between white evangelicals and non-white evangelicals. So I find that very interesting. And I think there's also a growing recognition that these are evangelicals who are pretty conservative in lots of ways. They go to church more. They are more anti-abortion than their white counterparts. And yet this issue of immigration does complicate this idea of evangelicals being more powerful, if that is what their goal is to be. So I think immigration is the choices that policymakers made in the 1960s continue to haunt us today. I would love for immigration policy debates to address some of the big decisions that have never been revisited. For example, how we make decisions about green cards and how they're allocated across countries around the world. So we haven't touched that issue, but if we do, I think we could see a very different future.
Yeah, I think the point you raise around immigration is such an important one. I was thinking some before our conversation today about some of the things that we might talk about. And one of the things I was thinking about in terms of narrative shifts that we might have. You know, I know the question was about what haunts us, so I hope to get back to that. But in terms of thinking about how we might shift away from some of these things that have haunted us for a long time, one of the things I've been thinking about is how we so often talk about people voting based on their values, especially religious people and especially white evangelicals. Often in the past, we've talked about white evangelicals being values voters, but, you know, Black women are voting because of race, right? Because of their racial interests, right? That people of color are voting for these self-interested reasons and not really thinking about their religion when they're voting. And I think what Trump has showed us is that everybody is voting for self-interested reasons, at least in part, right? That white evangelicals, all of these issues that they have said are because of their beliefs or because of their values, that actually a lot of those are really about identity issues for them too, right? So if you look at polling data from 2016 and why people said they voted for Trump, white evangelicals do not mention abortion. They do not mention LGBT rights. They don't mention anything that, you know, are these like culture war issues that we hear so much about. They mention immigration, which means they don't want immigrants to come to the US. And they mention the economy. And so those are really the things that they're, and terrorism, which is also about religious and racial identity issues, of course. So, so I think one of the things that we have really learned and that we can maybe shift a bit in how we talk about religion and politics and race and gender is that actually everyone is voting for reasons that relate to their religio-racial interests and identities, and also maybe voting for value-based reasons as well. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but I think we have to move away from this idea that people are primarily voting based on their religious beliefs or their religious values. That's one thing that I would say. To go back to your question about reproductive rights, you know, I just mentioned the kind of polling data from 2016, and one of the things I've also been thinking about is that, yeah, we have all of this media coverage of Amy Coney Barrett, and you know, we're so used to thinking about this as the main religious issue, especially for conservative voters. And I don't know if the data really show that. When people say why they're voting for Trump, they don't mention abortion, right? As the reason that they're voting. Maybe like 10% of white evangelicals at least say that that's why they're voting for Trump. But I'm curious about your own work, you know, with Black Catholics and maybe Black Catholic women in particular, and whether you're hearing different things from them.
It's really interesting. You know, I'm thinking about Catholics writ large, and the big conversation right now that I'll put it outside of a gender thing for a minute has been between conservative Catholics and more, you know, middle of the road or liberal Catholics, right? And so there's there's several internal battles. One internal battle is what are the cons versus the liberals saying, right? That's one. The second one is what is the priest or the priest and the bishop saying? And, you know, some bishops have stayed out of it as they should. You know, they should be reading Faithful Citizenship instead. And some of them have been very vocal about how you should vote. Now, this is anecdotally. I don't have, you know, polling evidence, although I would really love to see some. I think for Black Catholics, it's two things. One is, you know, a sense of that they have been traditionally sort of Democratic voters, but pro-life has been an issue for some. Not all, but for some, okay? And so that has been a very big tension for people, especially for those who might be a little bit older. And I'm gonna put my mother in this, might tend to watch, you know, Eternal Word Network, because, you know, there's a Fox News, if the Fox News for Catholics is Eternal Word Network, you know, it's great stuff to pray for, but it's also really conservative, okay? So you're hearing different kinds of things. And I think, you know, if we think about people, now she's not Catholic, but she's worked with Frank Pavone, you know, why does her name just went out of my head right now, Alveda King, who are, you know, who have tried to make this bridge between Catholics and evangelicals, right? And evangelicals of color to do this. Then I think you see the tension that's there. What I think is going to happen in this election cycle is that the distaste for Trump is going to trump everything, okay, to use it, to coin a phrase, and that they're going to vote, you know, Biden can count on those Democratic votes. But the conversation for us has been how to talk about this, not just for Catholic voters of color, but for white Catholic voters, because they tend to look a lot more like evangelicals, unfortunately, right now than anything. And that's the big work that needs to be done right now, is to try to think about that. And we haven't brought up Latinos yet, but I think this is also a really big, important issue, especially, tonight Trump is in Florida. And so I'm thinking about when I watched the town hall with Biden a couple of weeks ago when he was in Miami, the Cuban women who were asking him certain kinds of questions. And I'm wondering how that's going to play out. You've got a strong Cuban population in, Southern Florida, vis-a-vis this Puerto Rican population that has come in because of the storm that happened. And so I'm wondering how these votes are going to really stack up. And I'm really interested in this in terms of women and how they'll be voting in Florida. So I'll have to wait for that data for a little while, but I think it'll be interesting to see.
Well, you bring up something that it's fun. There's discussion taking place over in chat, and so this will be the moment, like in the biennial, where the audience poses a question. And we turn to our friend Reese Williams, who posted Melissa's point about immigration dividing the political commitments between white and non-white evangelicals. Emerson and Smith, of course, made an argument that the divide between Black and white evangelicals is racial justice / equity issues. Is this a divide then between Black evangelicals and Latino and Asian evangelicals?
I want to affirm that a lot of Latinx and Asian evangelicals care about race too, especially in this current environment. I mean, I think right now we're seeing, for example, lots of big debates happening in California over affirmative action. And you see, a lot of Asian Americans uncertain about what they're going to do, but there's a huge segment of the Asian American population that is very much in favor of affirmative action and really seeking common cause with other people of color. So yeah, I think bringing up the issue of immigration doesn't mean they also don't care about racial justice issues, but I'm not sure if I answered the question adequately.
I have a sort of an answer, and I'm going to put it to the panelists, but I'm going to put it to the attendees too. There's a piece 4 days ago in the New York Times about Hispanic evangelicals and Trump. And I thought this was a really good piece in saying that they were politically homeless, that many of them backed President Trump. And so one of the questions that has come up, and this, especially in the last month and a half of the election cycle, is what happens to Latino voters, because some of them are don't see Biden as a viable, candidate because they are more conservative and more, conservative on moral kinds of issues. So I think this is a really interesting piece. So I would say to Reese's question, there's definitely, I would say there is definitely a division between Black evangelicals and Latino and Asian evangelicals, and for the reasons that everybody's competing for certain kinds of things on the ground. And then secondarily, it depends on where they're at church at. And what I've been seeing is this question of, if all of these people, if each one of these groups are in racially mixed churches, right, then I think that they have a very big tension between their own ethnic concerns and the concerns that they're being told by their pastors about how they should vote or what they should do, right? And if you think about this in the grade level about, gender, then the question becomes are the women involved in, outside groups like Women Aglow or others that are pushing a certain kind of conservatism? Are they, involved in other sorts of groups? Are they set apart? These are the questions that I think need to really be answered. But I'd say on the level, yes, there are divisions, there are political divisions, and some of those divisions are also between not just putting these groups together, but the immigrant groups within those groups.
All right. Oh, go ahead, Grace, please.
I was just going to add that I know that Janelle's work, Janelle Wong, also showed that so non-white evangelicals were more liberal in their voting patterns than white evangelicals, but they were also more conservative than their non-evangelical, non-white counterparts, right? So for Latinx evangelicals, they were voting in more conservative ways than Latinx people who were not evangelical, but they were still much more democratic and much more progressive in their voting patterns compared with with white evangelicals. So they were sort of somewhere in the middle, right, in terms of combining those different identities and, you know, feeling the tension between those identities. And I agree with you, Anthea, that, you know, I'm sure some of that at least is institutional, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, if some of them are attending multiracial, you know, megachurches where most of the leadership is white, for example, they maybe aren't really hearing a lot about racial justice issues being a driving factor.
Yeah.
A little bit, compared with Black Protestants who consider themselves evangelical, who are attending a Black church where maybe some of those issues are being talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just going to jump in here though to say, even though I'm a religion scholar, I don't think religion matters as much here, at least when we're talking about Asian Americans, as much as generation does, and how long you are in the United States. I think that's really the dividing line between whether or not an Asian American voter is really committed to racial justice issues or not.
Interesting. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pose another question that's come in. I've got a list of questions that I'm curious about, but I don't want to hog up all my interest here. Alan Willis writes, if we are thinking about what issues haunt us, I am wondering how you, any of you, see religious outlook impacting the understanding of systemic discrimination, both race and sex or gender discrimination, and in particular, how that is reflected in the recent declarations from the Trump administration regarding anti-bias training and condemnation of critical race theory. Good question. Who'd like to take a stab at it?
Well, I mean, I think if we're going to talk about religious outlook, let me put it this way. The people who want nostalgia clearly like what Trump is doing, okay? Because if you're a nostalgia seeker and you want to go back to the good old days when we didn't have to talk about all this stuff, like critical race theory and anti-bias, then that means that you are probably a person who has been, you know, how shall I say, benefited from the status quo. I'll say it this way instead of just saying it the bald way that I would normally say it. If you're a person who benefits from the status quo, you definitely want things to go back to normal. Your religious outlook then is basically this. You have a colorblind religious faith. And that means that you just don't think we need to do any of this stuff because it's a waste of time and everybody should be equal. And, you know, you just have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? And that's kind of the line that everybody's been told. It's the way in which, you know, this particular part of the campaign is being run. But I think, you know, that's, to me, disingenuous, obviously, for a lot of different reasons. And I also think that it is a point in which what we see happening is this sort of, I call it the backlash to the backlash, right? So that this fear of what has happened, you know, this summer with racial justice issues and the killing of George Floyd and all this has put that on a big spotlight of America, right? Not living up to what it's supposed to live up to. And then this way in which you're trying to pull back is a way to say, oh, nothing else to see here, go back, you know, and not have to deal with it. It's the same thing, you know, and Melissa could talk about this from an immigration standpoint about how we don't want to deal with, you know, what has happened with immigration even before the Trump administration with the Obama administration, right? So there's lots of different ways to see this as a real salient issue between people who want to just sort of forget all the things that have been happening really since 2008. And then to forget, you know, to also try to pretend that we've had, you know, some kind of progress. And I'll leave it at that and let everybody else answer. If you want.
I have anything to add to that. I am skeptical that religious outlook alone can explain some of this colorblindness that is causing this opposition to critical race theory. And I will also say that I've been sitting with this issue of the executive order quite a bit. Just yesterday, got a really lovely message in my inbox from a troll, right-wing troll. I think that, you know, I'm reminded every day that there are people who are sort of really committed to ending this type of anti-racism work.
Yeah.
I'm just reminded of, I think it's probably been a year or maybe even a couple of years ago now, the statement on social justice, I think is what it was called, that was put out by a lot of evangelical, primarily white evangelical leaders that was basically a statement against critical race theory from an evangelical perspective.
Yes.
And my assumption is that, you know, this latest statement from Trump and these latest executive orders are direct attempts to speak the language of that group of people and that group of voters, and to remind them, I am on your side. I'm going to defend your interests and your religio-racial identities. And that's why I'm putting out these statements, right? So I don't know the degree to which it's actually true that religious outlook is driving these views, as you said, Melissa, but certainly those are statements that, you know, evangelicals and particularly white evangelicals have put out in the past that, you know, for religious reasons, we think structural racism doesn't exist, right? Or we think it's wrong to talk about structural racism, that we should just put all of that behind us. And certainly, you know, there has been work like Emerson and Smith's work, which I think Reese mentioned in the chat, that has, you know, pointed out the ways in which white people, white evangelicals are discouraged from thinking structurally about issues in general, including racism, in a way that, you know, for people of color, structural issues are often a part of what they think about when they think about their faith. You know, when they tell the Exodus story, right? In the Christian tradition, that is a structural story, right? And is central for a lot of people. So, so I think there are some of those religious differences, but I don't think they can be separated from racial identity. I think the two are completely integrated in a way that's impossible to separate.
Well, you know, two of our really fine Latino historians or scholars have written, and we're going to come up on time here soon, but I want to try to put these out there. Brandon Bain asks, on the issue of Latinx communities, evangelicalism / Pentecostalism, and Trump, I've noticed something anecdotally with our family and wider communities, that the older generations who are closer to the immigration experience and more attuned to Spanish language media, like Univision and Jorge Ramos, even though they are just as and often more conservative theologically, have leaned Democratic, while younger generations, further from immigration, more English media, are strong Trump supporters. To put it bluntly, my suegra hates Trump and my cuñados love him. Is there any evidence of this generational linguistic gap in sociological and political science work beyond my anecdotal observation?
That's an interesting question. Anybody want to take that first?
I will just say that I think that is exactly the opposite of what we've seen with Asian Americans. And I wonder if phenotypic difference plays a role here. If you are 5th generation Asian American, you can't hide the fact that you're Asian American. And I wonder if some communities that feel like they have the phenotypic advantage of being able to pass as white don't have to deal with that racialization and that encounter with racism that would cause people to not forget that they have immigrant backgrounds.
Okay, the other one comes from Brett Hendrickson, who writes, the New York Times reported yesterday that of the 30% of Latinos who support Trump, the majority are men. The report speculated that this may have something to do with the campaign's courting of Latina evangelicals, but concluded that it was Trump's macho, unapologetic style that most appealed to them. Does this conclusion reinforce the notion that evangelical Christian men, no matter their race, are more masculine than Catholic men? Or is it just relying on stereotypes of macho Latinos?
That's an interesting question. I saw that question. I was like, I got to answer this because I think, you know, I'm going to posit this another kind of way. I think that the notion that Catholic men are weaker or somehow less masculine, and the person who I had this conversation with on a whole nother topic was Bob Orsi, because we were talking about how did you experience, you know, policemen. And he was thinking about all the Irish policemen that he had knew in New York. And we have tons of Irish policemen here in Philadelphia. And so that is like the last thing I associate with Catholic men. I always think about Catholic men as brawling. And that might be maybe also a historic kind of piece. But I don't think about them as being weak relative to evangelical men. at all. And that's a really interesting way to put this. So maybe, you know, help me in thinking about this. But I'm thinking about this in terms of, you know, Branda's question about how, you know, the younger versus the older. And the person who came to my mind immediately with that question was Pitbull. Because I remember Pitbull came out for John McCain in 2008. Don't ask me why I remember these crazy things, right? But I remember that he was doing all these dances and everything, and he was supporting John McCain. And I thought, how did this happen? But I also think that it's the ways in which Latin communities are broken apart. I'm from Texas, you know, I come from kind of a Tex-Mex kind of background, and noticing this. And so that's very different than a Cubana or a, you know, Puerto Rican and all that. And so you have to sort of think about, what are the divisions, first of all? What is it that's appealing to people? And I think, honestly, that the thing that's probably the most appealing about Trump to any person who is of ethnicity who supports him is about the idea that he is a good businessman and he makes money. Because that is appealing to the immigrant ideal of what you can do when you come to America and who you can be. Now, granted, we all know that that doesn't mean that any of that money exists based on what the New York Times has told us. But I think that is the major part of the appeal for him, because it's not about what he says or how he's mean to everybody else and everything is interesting. It's about how can you make it too, and that these things are available to you. And you all are free to disagree with me, but I'll shut up and leave it at that.
I think that makes a lot of sense as an analysis. There was this sociology book that, you know, everybody was reading and teaching when I was in graduate school called Ain't No Making It. That was an ethnography that compared a group of primarily white teenagers and a group of primarily Black teenagers that lived in housing projects. And basically what they found is that the Black teenagers had all of these aspirations and really believed in the American dream, that they could make it. And the white teenagers didn't. And the difference was, they found years later, when unfortunately none of them had really made it, or most of them hadn't made it, you know, out of the housing projects. What they argued was that for the Black teenagers, their parents had faced Jim Crow segregation. And so they thought, like, okay, now that that's gone, everything's going to be fine. We can do it. Whereas the white teenagers had seen their parents not make it out of the projects, right? And the generation before not make it out. And so they knew that there were these structural barriers in place that were just going to make it difficult. And so there was this idea, I think, among the Black teenagers that, you know, there was a chance that they could make it now that some of those perceived structural barriers were gone. So I do wonder whether some of it is this idea that, you know, yeah, maybe some have bought into this notion that if I can just work hard like Trump does, I can get rich too. And that's a hope that they may have.
Yeah, never underestimate the power of that damn show, The Apprentice. Reality TV shows, it really changed people. And that's a whole nother conversation. I'll shut up.
I will say, you know, one reason I was interested in doing this session, and with you three especially, we have had a series of really good books that have come out recently on white evangelicalism, right? And it's sort of its disproportionate political power. A number of really, I mean, we understand it much better than we did before. And I wanted us to think about a different narrative altogether, you know, than that. But that question about, Brett's question about masculinity may be the one sort of bridge, given when you think of Kristen Kubas-Dumais' book, Jesus and John Wayne. I mean, it's a really good book. And I think that this is where I think Anthea is right, that the immigrant question there of the American dream, but especially with that disproportionate number of men who like Trump within that voting group, I think Kristen's argument probably shows up there as well. So,
yeah, that's a great point. How do we want to think about our last question, Phil?
There's one I have to pose just quickly, because you and I discussed, you know, how do we go there? We've got to talk for a minute, given what this topic is, about Kamala Harris. I mean, if this is a moment where we're talking about gender, people of color, politics, religion, I think it took maybe 24 hours before I saw two stories after Joe Biden announced her as his running mate, maybe 24 hours before people were saying, well, when it comes to religion, what is she? You know, she's a child of immigrants, one from Jamaica, one from India. Where does she fit into this sort of topic in this world that we've been talking about?
I think she's the perfect example, you know, and I'll just say it this way and let everybody else talk. I think she's the perfect example of how people transition from between faiths in this country. And if you're in an immigrant community, how do you hold these things together in order to, you know, both hold your heritage and to hold where you are spiritually and religiously together. And I think that's really, you know, really important. And I haven't heard her talk about that balance or how that happens. But I think, you know, we have to put ourselves in the mindset that people aren't one thing all of the time, nor do they practice one thing all of the time.
I just want to reference a study that was just released yesterday, the 2020 Indian Americans Attitude Survey. That's hot off the press, really exciting. One thing they found is that she has helped solidify Indian American support for the Democratic Party. And I think if you look at some of the narratives, a few months ago, there was a lot of concern knowing that Trump and Modi have a bromance of some sort. Will this draw Indian Americans to vote for Trump in 2020? Well, Indian Americans in general support the Democratic Party more than any other Asian American ethnic group, and that's even more the case now that Kamala Harris is on the ticket.
I would just say, you know, in terms of thinking about some of these larger narratives we've been talking about, in sociology at least, one of the narratives of the 20th century has been really shaped by Bob Wichnell's book on the restructuring of American religion, and this idea that denominationalism transformed into kind of religious right and religious left. And that, you know, Rhys Williams actually in the volume we just published has a great chapter where he talks about the ways in which that's really primarily a story about white Christianity. That all of the things we've been talking about, for all of the reasons we've been talking about, you know, many people of color who are religious in this country do not easily fit into one of those categories. And so we really need to try to stop forcing that, right? So when we think about Kamala Harris, she doesn't easily fit into one of those categories religiously, and we should stop trying to make her. And I think one of the reasons we maybe don't know as much about her religion is that people don't expect her to be able to talk about it in ways that make sense with these existing words we're used to using, right? And so they just don't talk to her about it. Or they ask her about it in ways that don't really make sense. So I think we have to try to get past these categories that we've been using for so long.
Yeah, I agree.
Kyoto Joshi, an old friend of the center, just wanted to thank us for commenting on that. I want to thank Kyoto also for her book on white Christian privilege, which I think helps explain all of those journalists immediately asking, well, what is she, right? There you, Melissa, your library. I'm thinking about, I've got to admit, I don't always remember book titles, but I remember what they look like. And I think I may have to color code mine as well. Well, I want to thank everybody here on the panel. This has been really great, especially to kick off this new series. Behind the scenes, I want to thank Joseph Tucker Edmonds, Lauren Schmidt, and Nate Wen, and thank the audience also for coming in and sticking with us through this conversation. I do want you to know this will be available on the center's website. We have a YouTube channel, and so it will be up on that. Two quick favors, though, I'm going to ask of everyone. First, that you mark your calendar for the next, it's also going to be the third Thursday at 3. That'll be November 19th. It will be on religion and the 2020 election, sort of a breakdown afterwards by Amanda Friesen, our own Amanda Friesen within the center. She's a political scientist, and Andrew Whitehead, who has joined us, is in the sociology department. And they'll also have some panelists as well. Also, there's going to be a very brief survey that you'll get. This will take you all of 60 seconds to fill out. We're trying to make this series as helpful as possible. So we need your assistance in sort of assessing what's going well and what we might want to think about doing as well beyond that. So again, thank you all. Have a great day.